in the time I've been at Inc., I've had the opportunity to see a lot of companies that I suspect are very similar to yours. When I showed up at Inc., when I arrived at Inc. in 1983, it was really a startup, or just beyond the startup phase. It was less than 4 years old. It was growing like crazy. Every 2 months, we would have 50,000 new subscribers, and we'd have to scramble around to get the copy together so that we could put out the magazine. And it was a very exciting time. It was exciting not only because of what was going on in the magazine, but even more because of what was going on outside the magazine. There was a tremendous change that was happening in the economy, and it was being led and driven by companies like yours. I think of it as the beginning of the entrepreneurial economy. Some of you are maybe too young to remember that there was a time when it wasn't considered a compliment to call someone an entrepreneur. It was actually a put down. You think, oh yeah, he's a real entrepreneur, like he had gold watches up his arm. Business magazines and business publications generally just paid no attention to the entrepreneurial part of the economy. That's actually why Bernie Goldhurst started Inc. magazine in the first place. That was beginning to change in 1983, and I like to think that Inc. had something to do with it. Frankly, I think Ronald Reagan had something to do with it. But mainly, it was happening because of the companies and their leaders who were really sort of changing the perception in the public mind of what entrepreneurship was. And I, by a tremendous stroke of fortune, wound up in Inc. magazine at a time when a lot of those companies and their leaders were still pretty young. I mean, I'm talking about Bill Gates at Microsoft, Steve Jobs at Apple, Anita Roddick at The Body Shop, Yvonne Chouinard at Patagonia, Ben Cohen and Jerry Greenfield at Ben & Jerry's, Tom Golisano at Paychex. I mean, I could go on and on. And it was just like really just a breathtaking moment in business history, and I happened to land right in the middle of it. And I began to notice then that some of these companies, the greatest companies, had something very, very special going for them. It's not just that they were successful, although they were all successful by the standard measures of business success. There was something else happening in these companies that I didn't have a name for at the time, but it was very palpable. It was something that I could recognize. I do have a name for it now. I call it mojo. And by mojo, I mean the business equivalent of charisma. When a leader has charisma, you want to follow him or her. When a business has charisma, you want to be associated with that business. You want to buy from it. You want to sell to it. You want to work for it. You want to wear its T-shirts and its caps. If the business happens to be Harley Davidson, you probably want to get its logo tattooed on your arm. But that is what it's really the feeling that you get when you're in the presence of greatness in business. Now, I've had the pleasure and the privilege of spending most of the last 4 years around companies that have tons of mojo, and I've written about 14 of them in my book, Small Giants. The subtitle of that book, as Joel mentioned, is Companies That Choose to Be Great Instead of Big. Now, I would be willing to bet that that's a choice some of you don't want to make. You just as soon be great and big, which is fine, if that's, if you can pull it off. But I still think that even those companies have a lot to learn from the companies that I write about. Why? Because in business, it's very easy to confuse greatness with getting big very fast. And when you avoid that problem when you decide that you're going to focus on companies that have made a deliberate decision not to get as big as possible, as fast as possible.